Mark Thompson had never been the kind of man to stir up trouble. A hard-working single dad, raising his 2 kids in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, he kept his lawn neatly trimmed, his trash cans tucked away on pickup day, and his noise to a minimum. The neighborhood's homeowners association was strict, sure, but Mark had never crossed any lines. Or so he thought. It was a warm Friday evening when the trouble began. Mark sat on his porch, sipping a cold beer after a long day, listening to the faint laughter of his kids, playing inside. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. It should have been peaceful, but from the corner of his eye, Mark caught sight of Karen Jenkins, his notorious neighbor, peering out from behind her curtains. Her eyes narrowed like a hawk. She clutched a small clipboard, which Mark knew was her unofficial rulebook. Karen was the kind of woman who thrived on control. She ran the HOA committee with an iron fist, quick to report any offense, no matter how trivial. Mark raised an eyebrow. What could she possibly be watching at this hour? His son Jake was just shooting hoops in the driveway. The ball's rhythmic bounce, breaking the stillness. But it was past the HOA's designated quiet hours. Mark figured Karen might complain, eventually, but tonight, it felt different. Almost like she was waiting for something. Then the shrill ring of his phone shattered the calm. Mr. Thompson. This is Officer Reynolds, from the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department. We received a noise. Complaint from one of your neighbors. The voice was clipped, official. Mark's stomach tightened. A noise complaint? From Karen? He sighed and looked outside. Karen was already on her phone, speaking quickly with a triumphant smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. Mark's heart sank. He knew she wasn't just reporting a noise violation. Karen had a personal grudge, and this was her way of turning the screws. Minutes later, the headlights of a sheriff's car glided silently into the driveway. Mark stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, bracing himself. The door of the car swung open, and the sheriff stepped out. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just any officer. It was David, his son, his eldest son, who had left home 5 years ago, after a bitter fight, disappearing without a word and cutting off all contact. David was tall and lean, his uniform crisp, but his face was unreadable, a mask of professionalism. The years apart had changed them both, but Mark hadn't expected to see his son here, especially not as the man wielding authority in this dispute. Mark, David said, his voice low but firm, avoiding any warmth. We got a complaint about noise. Your neighbor says there's a disturbance. Mark forced a smile, trying to keep his composure. It's just Jake playing basketball. He's usually done by this time. David's eyes flicked toward the driveway, then back to Mark. HOA rules are HOA rules, he said without judgment, but without leniency. I have to take the complaint seriously. Mark nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. This wasn't just about a noise complaint anymore. It was about everything left unsaid, every regret and every distance that had grown between them. The neighborhood was watching. Karen's eager gaze met his from across the street, waiting to see what would happen next. As David wrote something down on his notepad, Mark's mind raced. Was his son just doing his job? Or was there something more personal at play? Was David here to punish him, or to finally bridge the chasm between them? The evening air hung heavy with tension. What had started as a simple complaint was about to unravel more than just quiet hours in Willow Creek. Mark could feel it, because sometimes the fiercest battles aren't between neighbors. They're within families. The sheriff's car sat quietly. In Mark's driveway, its engine ticking softly as the evening shadows deepened. David, standing rigid in his uniform, glanced around the neighborhood with the watchful eyes of a man used to reading trouble beneath calm surfaces. He wasn't just a lawman tonight. He was a son confronting his past, and a stranger in a place that once felt like home. Mark's heart pounded with every tick of the clock. He wanted to say something, anything, but the years of silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. He swallowed hard and tried to focus on the present, on the issue at hand. David, Mark began cautiously, using his son's name like a tentative bridge between two worlds. This whole thing with Karen, it's blown out of proportion. Jake was just shooting hoops. David's jaw tightened. Rules are rules, Dad. The HOA has clear, quiet hours. People have a right to peace in their homes. Mark nodded, understanding the logic but bristling at the coldness in his son's tone. I get it, but Karen, she's made this personal. You know how she is. David's eyes flicked toward the street where Karen lingered, her posture rigid, a smile barely masking satisfaction. I'm here to enforce the law, not to take sides. Mark looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time in years. The man before him was not the boy who ran away in anger. He was someone shaped by experience, by duty, and by secrets Mark didn't know. Did you have to take this case yourself? Mark asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Couldn't someone else have come? David hesitated, then shook his head. When I saw it was your address, I volunteered. Mark's breath caught. That single act was heavier than anything said so far. Why volunteer? Was it guilt? A chance to reconnect? Or something else? Before Mark could answer, the sound of footsteps approached from the driveway. Jake emerged, basketball in hand, his face bright with innocent curiosity. Dad, who's this? Jake asked, eyes wide as he looked up at David. David crouched down to Jake's level, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm your brother, Sheriff David. The words hung awkwardly in the air. Jake blinked, confused. You're my brother, Mark swallowed, feeling a lump rise in his throat. He never imagined this moment. Introducing his son to a brother he didn't know he had, especially under such tense circumstances. Karen stepped forward then, her voice cutting through the uneasy silence. It's amazing what secrets come out when you're backed into a corner. David turned sharply to face her, eyes blazing. Karen, this isn't about your petty grudges. Karen's smile was thin, almost venomous. Petty? I'm just protecting the neighborhood from people like you. David's hand instinctively hovered near his belt, the tension crackling like static electricity. Mark could see the years of resentment bubbling beneath his son's calm exterior. Enough, Mark said firmly. This isn't helping anyone. Karen raised an eyebrow. Oh, I think it's just getting started. David's voice dropped to a low growl. If this is about you trying to run us out of town, Karen, you picked the wrong family. A sudden silence fell over the street. Neighbors peeking out of windows, whispers spreading like wildfire. The quiet neighborhood was no longer peaceful. It was a battleground. Mark felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His son, the law, was standing before him, not just as an officer, but as a man carrying the scars of their broken family. And Karen, the relentless neighbor, seemed poised to ignite a fire that could consume them all. The sheriff's badge gleamed in the fading light, a symbol of authority, and a reminder of everything Mark had lost and might never get back. As David stepped back to finish the paperwork, Mark's mind raced. How had a simple noise complaint turned into a war that threatened to unravel his family and the entire neighborhood? And what secrets still lay buried beneath the surface, waiting to explode? The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across Willow Creek's perfectly manicured lawns. The neighbors had retreated behind closed doors, but the tension still hung heavy in the air around Mark's house. Inside, the silence was deafening. Mark sat on the edge of his worn-out couch, staring at the empty spot where David had stood only minutes before. The image of his son in uniform, cold and distant, replayed relentlessly in his mind. It was a face he hadn't seen in years, one hardened by duty and distance, a stark contrast to the boy he once knew. Jake was quietly doing his homework at the kitchen table, stealing occasional glances at Mark. The boy sensed the unease, the invisible rift that had suddenly torn open their lives. Mark wanted to say something, to explain, to fix whatever was broken. But the words got caught somewhere deep inside. He thought back to the day David left. The shouting, the slammed doors, the years of silence that followed like a storm cloud. Their last conversation had ended with a bitter argument about dreams, responsibilities, and failures. David wanted to join the sheriff's department, but Mark had begged him to consider a different path. One he believed safer, easier. The rejection had hurt too much. Now, standing here, Mark wondered how much had truly changed, or if the wounds were just as raw beneath the surface. Outside, Karen was watching from her window again, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Mark felt a wave of anger rise, not just at her, but at the entire situation. It was like she thrived on dividing them, exploiting every crack. That night, Mark's phone buzzed. A message popped up. "We need to talk. Meet me at the community center. Midnight." No name, no explanation. Curiosity gnawed at him. Who would send such a message? And why? Against his better judgment, Mark decided to go. The neighborhood was silent when he slipped out, the streetlights casting eerie pools of light on the pavement. The community center loomed ahead, its doors locked, but the back entrance slightly ajar. Mark's heart thudded louder with every step. He wasn't prepared for what, or who, he would find waiting. Karen stood there, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with something unreadable, but she wasn't alone. A shadowy figure lingered just behind her, face obscured by the dim light. "Why am I here?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Karen smiled, but it wasn't the triumphant smirk he'd seen before. It was colder, more calculated. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about noise complaints or basketball games," she said softly. "It's about power, control. This neighborhood can't survive with people like you undermining the order." The shadow shifted, stepping forward into the light. Mark's breath caught as he recognized the familiar face. One of the HOA board members. Someone he'd thought was an ally. "What's going on here?" Mark demanded. Karen's eyes flicked between him and the board member. "Let's just say there are forces at work in Willow Creek that you don't understand." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. This was bigger than petty HOA disputes. Someone was orchestrating events behind the scenes. And Karen was at the center. He wanted to run, to call David, to fix everything with a simple explanation. But the silence inside him screamed that this was only the beginning. As he turned to leave, Karen's voice stopped him. "Watch your back, Mark. Not everyone here wants peace. Some want chaos, and you're standing right in the middle." The message was clear. The quiet neighborhood was a facade, and Mark had just stepped into a much darker game. Back home, Mark sat alone in the dark, the weight of Karen's words pressing on his chest. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets that no one dared to speak aloud, and somewhere deep inside, Mark knew one thing for certain. The battle for Willow Creek had only just begun. The moon hung low and pale over Willow Creek, casting a ghostly silver light on the streets that usually buzzed with friendly chatter, but now whispered only suspicion. Mark's mind raced as he made his way to the community center's back entrance. The anonymous message from earlier, the midnight meeting, was still a mystery. Who had sent it? What did they want? His footsteps echoed against the cracked concrete, nerves tightening every muscle in his body. He glanced behind him once, twice, but the street was deserted. No sign of shadowy figures or lurking eyes. Yet, the door creaked open before he reached it. "Mark!" The voice was soft, but unmistakable. Karen Jenkins stepped out, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. She looked different, less the triumphant neighborhood tyrant, and more like a woman, guarding secrets too heavy to carry alone. Before Mark could speak, another figure emerged from the darkness, a man tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a hoodie. Mark's heart skipped. He didn't recognize the man immediately, but there was something familiar in the way he moved. Controlled, confident, Karen's eyes gleamed as she motioned to the stranger. "This is Tom. Well, let's just say he has a stake in this neighborhood." Mark's stomach churned. "What's this all about? Why the secret meeting?" Tom stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We've been watching. There's more at risk here than you think. The HOA isn't just about keeping the lawns tidy or enforcing quiet hours. It's about control, about who gets to decide what's right and who gets to live in peace." Mark frowned, trying to piece together the puzzle. "And where do I fit into this?" Karen's smile sharpened. "You're a loose end. Someone who challenges the order." Tom's eyes scanned Mark, as if measuring his resolve. There are forces in Willow Creek that don't want change. People who thrive on keeping the neighborhood in line, no matter the cost. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined. "You're warning me," Mark said slowly. "But from whom?" Karen's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "From those who want to silence anyone who threatens their grip." Suddenly, Mark's phone buzzed violently in his pocket, making everyone jump. He pulled it out, the screen flashing a new message. "Trust no one, not even family." His blood ran cold. David. Mark's mind reeled. Was this some kind of game, a warning, or something darker? Karen watched him closely. "You're in deeper than you think, Mark. The sheriff, your son, is walking a tightrope, and so are you." Mark took a shaky breath. "Why involve me? Why now?" Tom's expression hardened. "Because the cracks are showing. People like you, like David, can tip the balance. But you need to be careful. There's a storm coming." Mark's thoughts were a whirlwind. He thought of David, the man who showed up tonight, enforcing rules, but hiding feelings. Was his son tangled in this web too? Or was he the key to unraveling it? As Karen and Tom faded back into the shadows, Mark was left alone in the cold night air, the weight of the secrets pressing down on him like a suffocating fog. The peaceful streets of Willow Creek weren't so peaceful after all, and Mark realized one chilling truth. In this neighborhood, no one could be trusted, not even family. Mark sat in his dimly lit living room. A map of Willow Creek's HOA complaints sprawled across the coffee table before him. Lines connected various addresses, names, and dates. An intricate web that hinted at something far bigger than a simple neighborhood feud. His eyes traced each link, searching for patterns, connections, anything that would explain Karen's obsession and the shadowy figures he'd met at the community center. His phone buzzed again. This time a text from David. "Meet me tomorrow. I've found something." Mark felt a mix of relief and dread. His son's involvement was deeper than he'd imagined. But if David was investigating, maybe there was hope. The next day, Mark drove to the sheriff's office, a small building nestled among the town's bland storefronts. David was waiting, leaning against his patrol car, his face unreadable. Without preamble, David pulled out a thick file and tossed it onto the hood. "Look at this. HOA complaints going back 5 years. Noise, parking, yard violations. But here's the kicker. Every complaint targets families who have challenged Karen's authority or questioned the board's decisions." Mark flipped through the pages, each case more suspicious than the last. "You think she's orchestrating this?" David nodded grimly. "It's more than that. She's using the HOA like a weapon. To intimidate, to isolate." Mark's mind flashed back to the secret meeting, to the cryptic warning from Tom, and the shadowy figures, the board members who sided with her. David's expression darkened. They're part of it. This isn't just about rules. It's about power. Karen and her allies want total control over Willow Creek. They're willing to ruin lives to get it. Mark felt a cold fury rise inside him. His family was caught in the crossfire of a battle he hadn't even seen coming. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mark asked, voice low. David hesitated. "Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me. Because I'm trying to protect you. And the kids." Mark looked at his son, seeing the conflict etched in every line of his face. Years of silence had left scars, but here, now, they shared a purpose. "We need proof," Mark said. "Something that can expose Karen and her cronies once and for all." David's eyes gleamed with determination. "I've been gathering evidence quietly. Surveillance, documents, witness statements. But it's risky. If they find out, they won't hesitate to strike back." Mark nodded. "Then we need allies. People who've been hurt by Karen's reign. We can't fight this alone." The sheriff's office was silent except for the rustle of papers and the distant hum of traffic. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Deceptively so. David handed Mark a small flash drive. "This has everything I've collected so far. Be careful with it." Mark pocketed the drive, feeling its weight like a lifeline. As he left, a sense of urgency pulsed through him. The quiet streets of Willow Creek masked a storm of secrets, lies, and betrayals. And the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the game became. Back home, Mark's phone lit up again. A new message flashed on the screen. "You're not the only one fighting this battle." He glanced at the sender. Unknown. The suspense tightened like a noose. Mark realized that the war for Willow Creek was no longer just about HOA rules or family grudges. It was about survival, and the clock was ticking. The night crept over Willow Creek like a silent predator, blanketing the quiet streets in darkness. Mark sat at his kitchen table, the flash drive from David plugged into his laptop. Files, photos, and recorded conversations filled the screen. Evidence of Karen's relentless campaign to control the neighborhood. Names, dates, and incidents painted a chilling picture. Karen wasn't just an overbearing neighbor. She was the mastermind of a silent, calculated takeover. Mark's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "You're digging too deep. Be careful who you trust." The warning sent a shiver down his spine. He glanced out the window. Across the street, the porch light of Karen's house flickered on briefly before plunging back into darkness. It felt like a silent threat, a reminder that she was always watching. The next morning, Mark decided to reach out to one of the families David had mentioned, the Carters. They had moved into Willow Creek 3 years ago, only to be dragged through a relentless series of HOA complaints that left them isolated and broken. The Carters' house was modest, but well kept. Mrs. Carter, a weary woman with kind eyes, answered the door cautiously. Mark introduced himself and quickly explained his and David's investigation. "We've been waiting for someone to stand up," Mrs. Carter said, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and exhaustion. "Karen's made life miserable for us, but most people are too scared to speak out." Mark nodded. "We're trying to gather enough evidence to bring this to light. We need your story." Mrs. Carter hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. Inside, the walls were decorated with family photos, reminders of happier times, now shadowed by stress and conflict. As Mrs. Carter recounted their experience, Mark's phone vibrated. Again, another message. Not everyone is what they seem. He glanced up to see a man watching him from across the street, his face half hidden in the shadows. Mark's pulse quickened. Was this another warning? Or someone who could help? Later, that day, David stopped by unexpectedly, his expression grave. "We're not just up against Karen," he said quietly. "There are people on the HOA board who are worse. People involved in illegal dealings, using the HOA for their own gain." Mark's mind reeled. What had started as a neighborhood dispute was unraveling into something darker. David handed Mark a folder filled with documents and photos. Evidence of bribery, intimidation, even threats. "We need to expose this. But if we're not careful, they'll come after us," David warned. Mark felt the weight of the danger pressing down on him, but the flicker of determination in his son's eyes reminded him that they were in this together. That night, as Mark locked the doors and double-checked the windows, he heard the faint sound of footsteps outside. The shadows seemed to move with a purpose, creeping closer to the heart of the storm. In Willow Creek, peace was an illusion, and Mark knew the fight for his family, his neighborhood, and his own redemption was just beginning. The air in Willow Creek had grown thick with tension. Mark's quiet neighborhood was now a battlefield, one where trust was a rare commodity, and every shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Mark sat in his study, the files from David and the testimonies from families like the Carters spread out before him. He could feel the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Exposing Karen and the corrupt HOA board could destroy the fragile peace left in their community and their family. David entered the room quietly, his face drawn and serious. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. Mark looked up sharply. "What is it?" "There's been a leak," David said grimly. "Someone knows we're gathering evidence. Tonight, there's going to be a special HOA meeting. Karen's planning something big." Mark's heart sank. The neighborhood gathering had always been a place of order, but now it felt like a trap. "Have to be ready," David continued. "If Karen controls that meeting, she'll silence anyone who opposes her." Mark's mind raced. He thought of Jake, his young son, innocent and unaware of the storm raging around him. Protecting his family was no longer just a priority. It was a necessity. That evening, the community center buzzed with uneasy energy. Neighbors gathered, whispers swirling like smoke in a dry room. Mark and David arrived early, their presence a quiet declaration of defiance. Karen stood at the front, her posture regal, a predator in a den. She opened the meeting with practiced charm, but her eyes flicked coldly to Mark and David whenever they spoke. The room was charged with unspoken fears and simmering resentments. Karen moved swiftly to propose a new set of HOA rules. Rules designed to tighten her grip on the neighborhood, restrictions that would grant her unchecked power and punish dissenters without recourse. Voices rose in protest. Mark spoke up, presenting the evidence David had gathered. He detailed the harassment, the corruption, the intimidation, all masked behind the veneer of community order. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then murmurs grew into heated debates. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. A scream echoed, followed by shuffling footsteps and panicked voices. When the emergency lights flickered back on, Karen was gone. Mark's heart pounded as whispers spread that she had fled the meeting. And the neighborhood. David pulled Mark aside. "This isn't over. She's dangerous. And she'll be back." Mark nodded grimly. The fight for Willow Creek was far from finished as the crowd dispersed. Mark's phone buzzed again. A new message. "Trust no one. The real enemy is closer than you think." Mark looked around at the empty streets, the peaceful lawns hiding secrets darker than the night. He realized then that the war for his family and his home was not just about Karen. It was about uncovering the truth, buried deep within the shadows of Willow Creek. The dawn broke over Willow Creek like a fragile promise. Mark sat on his porch, the weight of the past weeks pressing heavily on his chest. The neighborhood looked peaceful, too peaceful. The chaos of the last meeting, Karen's disappearance, and the cryptic warnings all swirled in his mind. But beneath the calm, a storm still raged. Mark's phone buzzed. Another unknown message. "Meet me at the old park. Come alone." His pulse quickened. Was this another trap? Or a chance to finally end the nightmare? Despite the risks, Mark knew he had to go. The truth was out there, tangled in shadows and lies, waiting to be uncovered. He arrived at the park just as the sun peaked over the horizon. The playground was empty, except for a lone figure waiting by the swings. Mark's breath caught. It was Tom, the mysterious man from the community center meeting. Tom's eyes were tired, but resolute. "You needed to know the whole truth," he said quietly. Mark nodded. "I'm listening." Tom took a deep breath. "Karen isn't acting alone. The HOA board isn't just corrupt. They're a front for something bigger. A group that's been manipulating Willow Creek for years. And your son, David, he's been caught in the middle of it." Mark's heart thundered. "Caught in the middle? What do you mean?" Tom looked away, struggling. "David's been investigating corruption, yes, but there's more. He's been working undercover, gathering evidence against a criminal network that uses the HOA to launder money and control the neighborhood. That meeting you saw, the chaos, it was part of their plan to scare you off." Mark's mind spun. His son, the sheriff, had been risking everything, walking a dangerous line between justice and survival. "But why keep it a secret?" Mark asked. "Because revealing the truth would put him, and you, in grave danger," Tom said. "That's why the warning said, trust no one. The real enemy is closer than you think. Some of your closest allies might be compromised." Mark's hands trembled. The quiet battles, the hidden threats. It was all part of a war he'd never imagined. Suddenly Tom's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and paled. "Karen's been found," he whispered. Mark's breath caught. "Where?" "In custody. But she's cooperating. For now." As the pieces fell into place, Mark understood the true cost of the fight. For his family, his community, and himself. Later that day, Mark met David at the sheriff's office. There was a new respect between them. A bridge rebuilt through shared struggle and sacrifice. David handed him a file. Complete evidence ready to expose the criminal network and corrupt HOA board members. Mark felt a surge of hope. The neighborhood he loved was still salvageable. As the sun set over Willow Creek, Mark realized the battle wasn't just about rules or power. It was about protecting the fragile bonds of family and community. And this time, they would win.